Welcome back to Face the Nation. We now want to go to House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff. He's a Democrat from California and joins us from the Los Angeles area. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I want to start on Ukraine. The United States purchases about 600,000 barrels of Russian petroleum products a day. Speaker Pelosi said that oil should be banned. The White House says it's looking at options. What is that option? Does the solution come from Congress, or is this something President Biden needs to act on?
I think it could come from either place. I think there's very strong bipartisan support to cut off Russian oil and gas sales to the United States. It's anathema, I think, to many of us in Congress that while we were sanctioning them and trying to cripple their economy, that we would help them in any way by purchasing their petroleum. But I think the administration wants to make sure that we work with our allies. This will have an impact potentially on global oil prices, including here at home, where in Los Angeles now gas is over $5 a gallon. So he wants to make sure that we understand the impact on the global supply. But I think there is strong support to show solidarity with Ukraine, but also to make sure that American dollars aren't supporting the Russian war machine in any way.
How quickly does that need to happen? I mean, this is Putin's lifeline. It's a cash cow.
Well, I think we'd like to act on it very quickly. At the same time, we have to be circumspect about the fact that Russia will probably find somewhere else to sell that oil and gas to. So the impact ultimately on Russia may not be as powerful as we would like. It's why we have to continue to explore additional ways to really crush the Russian economy. But I have to say, I'm enormously impressed with how the world has come together, with how here in Congress, in a very partisan Congress, Democrats and Republicans are uniting around this tough sanction package, as well as providing more defensive military support to Ukraine. There is enormous solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine.
There is solidarity, but it seems that Vladimir Putin is willing to suffer the consequences of those sanctions, and the Russian people are. The military is not stopping its advance, at least that we can see. What will happen if, as President Zelensky is predicting, he loses his life in this Russian attack? What will the United States do then?
Well, he has, I think, been an incredibly courageous wartime leader. This was, I believe, another miscalculation by Putin, who believed Zelensky was weak, would not be able to lead a country to war. But in fact, he has proved to be enormously strong and not only rallied Ukrainians, but I think rallied people around the world. I don't want to contemplate what might happen in his absence, although I do think Ukrainian people will fight on, and we will continue to support them. But obviously, we're doing everything we can, supplying, I think, real-time intelligence to help protect him, as well as to give Ukrainians the information they need to defend themselves.
The U.S. and global powers, as we spoke to Secretary Blinken about, are potentially on the cusp of a new diplomatic deal with Iran, a renewed version of this nuclear program. Should the Biden administration present that to Congress for review? Do you want to take a look at it?
Well, I'm certainly going to want to look at it and study it and assess the merits of it. I think it will come down ultimately to whether it is essentially re-entering the deal that the Trump administration pulled America out of, or it is substantially a new and different deal. If it's the latter, then I think it will require a vote in the Congress. If it's the former, then the administration may be able to do that on its own. Ultimately, I think the decision to pull out was disastrous. Iran has moved forward, both in terms of its enrichment, but also in terms of its expertise. And ultimately, we're going to have to weigh the impact of that on any new agreement.
You are chair of intelligence. You know well Iran's espionage activities and the operations they've tried to carry out on U.S. soil, including this attempt to kidnap a New York-based journalist. There are also threats against former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and other Trump officials. Should this new deal with Iran include a promise to stop carrying out those kind of operations on U.S. soil?
Well, I would love a nuclear deal to include prohibitions on Iran's malign activities, a cessation of its missile and drone program. But the question is not what I would like, but rather whether a deal that is confined to curbing Iran's ability to get a bomb is a good deal. And I think if we can take off the table any pathway to a bomb for Iran, that in and of itself is worthwhile. These other malign activities of Iran's, their plots against the U.S. personnel or Americans around the world, we can deal with and have to deal with separately, and we should deal with them aggressively. But I wouldn't say that we should neglect to stop their nuclear program because of these other activities. We need to go after all of this, not necessarily in one agreement.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about the January 6th committee. There was a development this week, a court filing claiming there is now evidence that President Trump broke the law in his efforts to overturn the election in 2020. Do you think that the Attorney General is moving fast enough with his enforcement?
What we made clear in our filing to the court is we believe there's a good faith basis to conclude that the former president and his campaign may have violated any number of federal laws, including obstructing an official proceeding, the joint session, and defrauding the American people. And I do think that the Justice Department ought to be looking at these issues and ought to be investigating. In particular, just to give one very graphic example, the former president on the phone with the Secretary of State in Georgia demanding that he find 11,780 votes that didn't exist, but the precise number he would need to overtake President Biden. I think if anyone else had engaged in that conversation, they would be under investigation, and it should be no different for the former president. So I think the department is diligently pursuing those who attacked the Capitol that day, but there were multiple lines of effort to overturn the election that may have violated the law, which also should be investigated.
All right. Chairman Schiff, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be right back. We turn now to the refugee crisis. Christina Ruffini reports from Poland.
As Ukrainian men stay behind to defend their country, Ukrainian women are fighting their own battles. Navigating danger, rubble, and chaos.
It was scary. We got scared. Before that, we did not think we would leave.
Panicked crowds and freezing temperatures, hauling children, luggage, even the family dog. Thousands of refugees have fled into surrounding countries, more than 100,000 to Slovakia, almost 170,000 to Hungary, and more than 800,000 to Poland.
I want to stop war and get back my normal life. I want to live in peace.
29-year-old Kristina came to this border crossing with a mission: to pick up and deliver this car to the front, paid for with donations and filled with supply.
Yeah, we have night vision. It's really hard to get now.
Since military-aged men can't leave Ukraine, women are acting as couriers.
It's whole country fighting against enemy united, like helping each other.
The only thing that helps these days is to work and to believe.
Believe that this will end, that they can win, and that their country and its people will be made whole. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was here yesterday where he met with refugees and told them they are not alone. And in a show of support, President Biden has asked Congress for $4.2 billion in aid for Ukraine. Margaret?
Christina Ruffini in Poland. Thank you. We want to go now to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Fillippo Grandi. He's at a refugee shelter at the Ukrainian-Polish border. Good afternoon to you, High Commissioner. You have said this is the fastest moving refugee exodus since World War II. What are the numbers now? What are you seeing?
As of today, we've passed the terrible mark of 1.5 million refugees, and this in 10 days. Essentially from Ukraine into 5 neighboring countries, the bulk here in Poland, where I am now. And if I think of past decades, I cannot think in Europe of a faster exodus of people, not since the end of the Second World War, I would say.
What are you seeing in terms of the state that people are showing up at these shelters in? What do they need?
Men of military age, which is from 18 to 60, cannot leave the country. They are in conscription and they have to stay there to defend their country. So it's mostly women, children, elderly, many disabled people, And they are, above all, frightened, traumatized. These are people that until just a few days ago had a perfectly normal life. And in a matter of hours, everything is thrown apart. And they had to be on the road, very difficult journeys, very traumatizing journeys through war-torn Ukraine up to the border. And now here, where they're safe, but of course they're separated from families, uncertain about their future. So I would say that trauma and anguish is the most defining feature at the moment.
Can civilians safely get out of the country? How many people would be refugees but are instead displaced and at risk right now?
These statistics are impossible to define precisely because we don't have access. We are, UN agencies and Red Cross are inside the country, but they can not move everywhere. This is why the UN and the Red Cross are trying to negotiate safe passage to the most affected places. But up to now, we have not succeeded in getting the necessary guarantees and respect for the ceasefire. That's the only way that we can send convoys in, bring supplies, and if necessary, bring people out. But people are moving also from other places that are even less impacted. Sometimes they move before it happens because they know it might happen to their location. So this is an extremely messy situation.
Who is firing on those safe passages?
There is bombardment by the Russian forces, and this is what people are mostly afraid of. Yesterday, I was in Moldova, another neighboring countries. People were coming from the city of Odessa, where there is no bombardment yet, but sirens have sounded over the day, and people are so afraid that they just leave their homes, especially people with children. They want to bring them to safety.
High Commissioner, you've been dealing with these record refugee numbers all around the world, even before this happened in Europe. What happens now that you have this massive influx? What does the UN need? I mean, what kind of resources do you need?
Well, let me state the obvious first. We need this to stop. We need this to stop because without the war stopping, people will just continue to pour out of the country. 1.5 million is difficult enough to manage even for relatively stable and prosperous countries in Europe. Imagine, however, if we go further up, and we will, no doubt, if it doesn't stop. Now, for the people that are on the movement, first of all, we need to get more supplies inside Ukraine. And for that, we need at least some areas of tranquility where we can deliver help. And then here, for the mass of refugees, a lot is needed. Any kind of relief supplies. We need cash to help people. We need logistical support. European countries have means and organization, but if this number of people grows, we will need more international support. And at some point, if people stay here for a long period of time, there will have to be other countries offering places to host refugees, even outside Europe.
Tell me about that, because there was massive political backlash in 2015 when Syrian refugees poured into Europe. There's charges of racism, of discrimination. Poland, just in the past year, has tried to build a wall to keep refugees out coming from the Middle East, from Africa. What is different now, and what is happening to those refugees?
I think there is, of course, at the moment, a colossal emergency. There are certain geopolitical factors at play, but I look at the future. And you're right, we've been struggling with convincing Europe to open the doors for more people, not to push back people. But I think that this crisis, and I've said it before, carries an important message that anybody can become a refugee very suddenly, and that any country can become a frontline refugee receiving country needing the support of others. Europe is learning fast to work together in so many ways in response to this crisis. I hope that this working together will apply to all people seeking refuge in Europe, not only now, which is happening, but in the future as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. High Commissioner, for your time today, and good luck to you. We'll be back in a moment. We're joined now by Kurt Volker. He was a former U.S. envoy to Ukraine and former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he joins us now. Thank you for coming on the program. You've been arguing for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. NATO says that's off the table. The United States, no way, no how, no combat troops. Because President Biden says this would trigger World War III. Why is he wrong?
Well, I think there are ways to do this that mitigate those risks. It doesn't eliminate the risk, but it mitigates the risk of direct conflict with Russia. First off, I think we have to recognize that the civilian casualties and the horrific scenes that we just saw are going to get worse. They're not going to get better. There's going to be massive airstrikes against Kyiv, against other cities, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. So if we can prevent that from a humanitarian point of view, I think we need to try. And the way to do this that I would recommend is we make clear the humanitarian purposes. We limit the scope geographically to Kyiv and Western Ukraine, so we're not getting close to Russian borders. We make clear that we will only fire if fired upon on any ground targets. We are not there to strike anything. We make clear to the Russian military that we will not strike their aircraft or their helicopters as long as they stay outside the zone. Mm-hmm. And then there are rules of engagement that our Air Force and others are very good at, of escorting people out of a zone without fire if they're not fired upon. And I think we apply all of those things in order to try to create a safe space for the civilians.
So other former ambassadors to NATO have made the public argument that this is unrealistic because you would have to take out Russian systems not only in Ukraine, but long-range ones inside Russia. You go to war like this.
You don't do that because that does bring us directly into the fight. Russia does not want us in the fight. And I think we are letting Putin get inside our heads and deter us from doing things to protect civilians, rather than taking into account that he does not want the U.S. or other countries supporting Ukraine.
So if the goal ultimately, diplomatically, is to stop the carnage and stop the war, how do you get Vladimir Putin to back down? Who can actually do that? Because the Germans tried, the French tried, the Israelis tried. No one's got any success. The U.S. is talking to China. Who can do this?
The Ukrainian people can do this. The Ukrainian people are there. They are determined. They are fighting. We are fortunate that we don't have to be in a position of fighting Putin or trying to stop him. The Ukrainian people are ready to do this. And that's why it's critical that we give them every bit of support and assistance we can.
When you say it will get worse, I mean, the French president has indicated that's basically what Vladimir Putin told him. Tell me what is the scenario the public needs to prepare for? Because NATO is already saying cluster bombs are being used. You hear incredible accusations from the Ukrainian government about what is happening. The United States intelligence says lists of people to send to camps are being drawn up. Is this a scenario where you can see someone sitting down and negotiating the way out?
Not at all. No, we have to understand that Putin is bent on a military victory. He wants to destroy Ukraine, decapitate the leadership. He doesn't care about how many casualties this causes, what happens to the civilian population. This is a messianic mission that he is on. This is why he has to be stopped. And again, we can do things to assist the Ukrainians. Very happy to hear Secretary Blinken say that we are now green-lighting the aircraft from Poland to Ukraine. We should be providing some of our own A-10 aircraft that we're ready to put into storage. There are trained Ukrainian pilots who use them. We should be looking at more means to get more support in quickly. What the UN High Commissioner just said was they need tranquil areas inside Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, there are areas where there is no Russian fighting now. We could try to help create those tranquil areas for delivery of assistance. So much more we could be doing.
Is there the political will for that? You served in the Trump administration. Former Vice President Pence said Friday, there's no room in the Republican Party for apologists for Putin. It's kind of extraordinary he had to say that.
Yeah, we've heard that in our media. We've heard that from some politicians here. But I think, as you heard also from Adam Schiff, there's incredible bipartisan unity in the Congress, Senate, and the House, and among experts and national security figures here in the country. Everyone sees what Putin is doing. There is no support for this whatsoever. Full support for Ukraine. The only question is how far we go to help Ukraine.
Was the former president an apologist for Putin? That's what the vice president said.
Well, I'm not going to pass a judgment on that. We heard what he said. You know, he said that Putin was acting in a smart, savvy way. I mean, that's not the messaging that you want to send. The messaging you want to send is that he is acting in an irresponsible, inhuman way, killing people in an unjustified war, and we should be on the side of the Ukrainians to help them.
Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us today. We'll be right back. There was some good news this week. Progress at home battling COVID. There are some hints that life might be returning to something resembling normal. CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman reports.
Happy Mardi Gras! When the only mask in sight is a Mardi Gras costume, you know something's changed.
It's like your soul re-entering your body. It feels good to be back.
Starting tomorrow in New York,
we are winning. So let's celebrate the win.
One of America's first cities to impose a mask mandate in public spaces will lift it. Starting Monday, New Jersey ends mandatory masking in schools. California, Oregon, and Washington State will do the same next week. COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths all down dramatically. Under the CDC's new metric, more than 90% of Americans live in counties with low or medium COVID risk. And a big reason is vaccinations. 3/4 of adults now have theirs. Another booster, with COVID cases down, the labor market's up. Nearly 700,000 jobs added last month. 90% of jobs lost during the pandemic have returned. But COVID always comes with a caveat. Health officials warn the pandemic is hardly over, and children under 5 are especially vulnerable. But overall, in unmasked America, we're breathing easier.
Our Mark Strassman with some news on COVID for a change. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.